And there it is. So we've just been working on the assignment on George Takei's TED Talk speech. There were 3 questions in assignments, and make sure that you submit them by the end of the day today. And by the end of the day, I mean the end of the day. So that you have this evening as well. Hopefully that task is not too much of a burden for you. I've got some other things that we want to take a look at. And the first is we want to keep going over some of these moments in Farewell to Manzanar. And so if you would, we went through 156. So let's take a look at page 161. And there's some interesting business kind of happening here as well. So her mother is supporting her. She's been named as, what is it, Carnival Queen or something along those lines? Isn't that what that was? Something like that? Yep, Carnival Queen. So it's like, kind of like Homecoming Queen. How many of you are familiar with the Niles Apple Festival? Anybody familiar with the Niles Apple Festival? So they have like Apple Princess, and there's all sorts of royalty that goes on there. So if we're looking at 161, her father is angry with her, and ultimately it's because she was honest about what she had worn, and now she's not sure if she's done the right thing. So there's all sorts of, she's struggling a lot. And she wants to be accepted. She doesn't want to be rejected. And her mother is, being accepting of her at this particular moment. And so that second paragraph, take a look at that second paragraph on 161. And Jean writes, her support and Papa's resistance had one point in common. Too much exposure was unbecoming. All the other girls, my 4 attendants, were going strapless. Oh, I can't even imagine that conversation. Mama wouldn't allow this. By the time we finished shopping, I had begun to agree with her. When she picked out a frilly ball gown that covered almost everything and buried my legs under layers of ruffles, I thought it was absolutely right. I'd used a low-cut sarong to win the contest, but once chosen, I would be a white-gowned figure out of Gone with the Wind. I would be respectable. Now, this is a callback to something that happened earlier. And what might that be a callback to? You have any thoughts on that? This reminds me of another moment earlier in her life. What does being Carnival Queen enable her the opportunity to be, Katie? To dress up, to become that girl from the confirmation that she was like, oh, she's like, I don't know, was it a princess that she compared her to or something along those lines? So there's an interesting sort of issue that's kind of happening here in this particular moment. And then, so let's take a look at page 162. And this goes back to that poem that we looked at, kind of at the start, certainly at the beginning of January, but within that, those early readings. So if we start with, probably that first full paragraph, I think. Lois Carson, the trustee's daughter, was one of them, one of the attendants. She wore a very expensive strapless gown and a huge orchid corsage. Her pool-browned shoulders glowed in the harsh bulb light above the lockers. "Oh, Jeannie," she had said as we took off our coats. "What a marvelous idea." I looked at her inquisitively. "The high neck," she explained, studying my dress. "You look so sedate, just perfect for a queen." As the other girls arrived, she made sure they all agreed with this. "Don't you wish you'd thought of it?" she would say. And then to me, during a silence she felt obliged to fill, "I just love Chinese food." The others exclaimed that they too loved Chinese food, and we talked about recipes and restaurants until the music faded in. Now, what's going on there? What do we have happening in that moment? How awkward, first of all. But what's going on there? Do you have any thoughts about that? What might we call that in the language of some of your advisory lessons? How is it that there's a microaggression happening there? Certainly not intentional, and frequently our microaggressions are not intentional. But what happens there? What happens in that locker room that is so awkward?
Like says stuff that, like, guys, like, not the whole culture, but I don't know, like the American version of the Chinese culture. She's trying to relate to that kind of.
So she's trying to relate somehow to Jean, right? But I mean, what's the big issue here? What is the big issue? What has she done? What have all of them done? Do you remember that poem that I'm talking about? Let me see if I can find it. It's subtly racist, certainly without meaning to be. Can't tell. That's exactly right. That was what it was. Can't tell. Good memory. I don't know why I couldn't remember it. So that poem can't tell about the Chinese people who were afraid of being identified as Japanese because of their Asiatic features. She's not Chinese. She's Japanese. And so there's this conflation that happens, this equivalency, which is ultimately not, that's not what she is. And so there's this awkwardness. She's made to feel uncomfortable. There may be an element of shame that she feels again under these current circumstances. And then the last moment, page 163, 164. So it's the last two pages of the section that I had asked you to be up to for yesterday. A burst of applause resounded beneath the music, politely enthusiastic, followed by a steady murmur. The gym was packed, and the lights were intense. Suddenly, it was too hot out there. I imagined that they were all murmuring about my dress. And so again, and this is a question that I had asked you, I think, last time. How many of you have ever felt self-conscious? And so she's self-conscious already because of her ethnic identity. And add to that her adolescence. Adolescence is such a difficult period of time. And so all eyes are on her, and she imagines that they're all murmuring about her. Imagine what she might be feeling at this particular moment. They saw the girls behind me staring at it. The throne seemed blocks away, and now the dress was stifling me. I had never before worn such an outfit. It was not at all what I should have on. I wanted my sarong, but then thought, no, that would have been worse. Papa had been right about the sarong. Maybe he was right about everything. What was I doing out there anyway? Trying to be a carnival queen? The teachers who counted the votes certainly didn't think it was such a good idea. Neither did the trustees. The students wanted me, though. Their votes proved that. I kept walking my processional walk, thinking of all the kids who had voted for me, not wanting to let them down, although in a way I already had. It wasn't the girl in this old-fashioned dress they had voted for. But if not her, who had they voted for? Somebody I wanted to be and wasn't. And how much of this is about her being adolescent? How much of it is about her being Japanese? How much of it is about her being a Japanese adolescent? How much of it is about her being a Japanese adolescent who spent like 3 or 4 years in prison? Unwanted by the rest of the country, unrecognized by the rest of the country, ignored by the rest of the country. Who was I then? According to the big wall speakers now saxophoning through the gym, I was the girl of somebody's dream. I looked ahead at the throne. It was even further away, a purple carriage receding as I approached. I glanced back. My four attendants seemed tiny. Had they stopped back there? Afterward, there would be a little reception in one of the classrooms, punch and cookies under fluorescent tubes. Later, at Lois Carson's house, there'd be a more intimate, less public gathering, which I'd overheard a mention of, but wouldn't be invited to. Champagne in the foothills, oyster dip. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to be 10 years old again, so I could believe in princesses and queens. It was too late. Too late to be an Adori dancer for Papa. Too late to be this kind of heroine. I wanted the carnival to end so I could go somewhere private, climb out of my stuffy dress and cool off. But all eyes were on me. It was too late now not to follow this make-believe carpet to its plywood finale. And I did not yet know of any truer destination. Yeah.
My mom was supposed to call me out at 11. I guess she called, but I haven't got it back.
I don't know what that means. Let me check. Let me see if I have something. I don't have anything, but go ahead and check and see, I guess. Okay. It was about an early dismissal. So, what is it that's happening here? How do you feel for Jean? What do you think of what Jean is going through here? What's happening? What is this experience all about? Any thoughts? How many of you can relate to her experience? A little bit? What is it that you relate to? What is it that we relate to about this experience? And again, I think of the girl that I dated. We were a largely white community. She was a minority in that community, seeking to belong. And that is something that I have never had to experience. I've not been the closest that I have come. I have been the only male in an all women's course. That's the closest I've come. And there were moments in that course where I felt uncomfortable, but at the same time, I never felt judged. There was a recognition that, it was not abnormal for me to be there. I had to take the course. But there were odd moments. There was the occasion where they would talk about things where I was like, can we not talk about that? It was when the Hooters chain was spreading across the country. And, hi. Yeah, she just went down to check out.
Oh.
Okay, thanks. And maybe you crossed paths. The Hooters chain was franchising across the country, and the women in my course they wanted to go on a field trip because the class was the dramatization of American women and how women are represented in American society. And they were like, come join us. And I was like, no, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. I did not want to go with a large group of women to a restaurant that objectifies women. That was the last thing in the world that I wanted to do. I mean, the idea of the place kind of, it makes me uncomfortable anyway. But to add to that, the fact that I would be the only male with a large group of women, but they invited me. I was not, in the circumstance of Jean. And certainly there have been circumstances in my life when I've not been invited places. I think we can all maybe relate to that a little bit, that there have been parties that we've not been invited to, that we've heard about, or other sorts of circumstances. And of course, under those circumstances, who do we blame for not being invited places? Do we blame the people who are having the party? What do we do? What is it that we do for our exclusion? How do we respond to being excluded? Yeah, we have a tendency to blame ourselves. So that idea that when Jean cannot join the Girl Scouts and her friend apologizes and Jean says that's okay, she blames herself for, a variety of reasons. She recognizes that she is different in some way. And so how is it that we treat others? Are there other questions or moments within Farewell to Manzanar that you've marked, that you want to point out, that you want to address? Otherwise, I want to kind of shift a little bit. Is there anything in particular that you want to hit on? Again, I can't emphasize enough that this is a universal story. There's something within this story, within Jean's story, that even though we might not be a young girl, even though we might not be Japanese, even though we might not have ever experienced internment, that there's a little something about her experience that we can all relate to in some way at some point. That emphasizes how important our individual experiences are. So we're going to be writing about Farewell to Manzanar soon, and I think it'll be on Friday that I give you the writing assignment. And we'll start kind of investigating and figuring out which prompt you want to write about, and maybe start drafting a little bit and digging into things. Before we do that, to kind of ready ourselves for that, I want to look at our contract. That we created before winter break. In order to function as a group, when we have questions or comments about something in the agenda or something that's going on in class, or we simply have something to share, we'll raise our hand. If it's a private issue, we'll email the teacher. We'll ask the question in chat. We'll unmute and ask the question if no one is speaking. This is, super awkward, but we're doing the best we can. Let it go.
Yeah, quite all right. Appreciate the report that you gave them.
Good. Was it a surprise?
Yes.
Really?
It was.
Well, all right. I don't know why. So we'll unmute and ask the question if no one's speaking. When we have a question or a comment that deals with something we're not comfortable sharing out loud, we will email the teacher or come to office hours. When someone says something that offends me or that confuses me, in the moment, we'll put something in the chat, unmute, and ask after it, as Zane did. What was asked? It was just somebody about early dismissal. But it was a valuable question. That was an important question to ask. If you can't hear something that's going on in the room, if you get a sense that somebody's saying something, raise your hand, ask for clarification, and be patient. Be patient. When someone says something that offends me or confuses me after the fact, email the teacher, be patient. When reading something or viewing something that is potentially upsetting, we can explore why it is that we're upset by what we're reading or viewing. Explore why the upsetting content is included. So why is it that we're talking about this? And ultimately, why are we reading about Jean's story, Farewell to Manzanar? Why are we reading about her experience? Can anybody tell me that? Why are we doing that?
Because it relates to us. It just is eye-opening.
So that, again, that universality. Yeah. And it's opening our eyes to experiences that we don't have at the same time. Even though there are experiences that we've had, there are experiences that we have not had that enable us to be able to empathize with other people a little bit better. So, end message to the teacher. Number 6, to show respect for others and the ideas of others, both in the classroom and virtually. We can engage with the chat, unmute, cameras if possible, raise hand function. Number 7 is a community of learners in order to have a safe yet courageous conversation about history, race, and discrimination. We should recognize we're not always going to be in agreement, so we shouldn't judge the person based on what they've said. We've not all had the same experiences. Respect one another and keep an open mind. Show appreciation for and be able to hear one another's point of view and experiences. Recognize that we as individuals do not know everything. My little girl, man, she is struggling with so much right now, and I frequently have to remind my wife, we don't know what she's going through. The most important thing that we can do is be there for her. We don't know what she's dealing with, what's going on in her head right now. Respect one another, keep an open mind, show appreciation for, be able to hear, did I do that? Recognize, don't know everything. Think before we speak, avoid jumping to conclusions. And so that is another example. And using my wife and child again. I think I've told you, my daughter suffers from misophonia. She hears like repetitive noises. She hears people like typing or eating, and she flips out. She would, if in the classroom, she would like to take her pencil and jam it in your hand because she can't take it. Okay. And when we took her older sister back to school in January over, was it MLK weekend? Yeah, Martin Luther King weekend. We went out to eat, my 2 daughters and I, and she did not have to use her headphones. That was a huge win. I could not get over that. And my older daughter, she had crispy bacon, and I was eating toast. And she did not need her headphones. We got home, and I told my wife. My wife jumped to a conclusion. She goes, oh, so it's always me. I said, come on, that's not fair. That is not fair. It could have been, any one of us at any moment at that restaurant. We just happened to have a good moment. Don't jump to conclusions about somebody's experiences. It's easy to, and what my wife did in that moment, blamed herself. She blamed herself. And frequently when we blame ourselves, we take it out on other people. Jean is keeping a lot of it inside. What does her dad do? What does Jean's dad do when he is, feeling things personally? How does he respond? When he takes things personally, when he blames himself for the way that he's being treated, what does he do? Yeah, and drinks. He's an alcoholic, and he's abusive to his wife. And will treat others the way that we want to be treated. And so the reason I'm bringing this up, our next text deals with the N-word, and I've seen this happen enough that I recognize that it's something that you may not be aware of. The word Jap is an ethnic slur. It's not quite on the level of the N-word, but it's up there. And one of the reasons why I want you to be thinking about this, certainly because of the next text, but so consider this. Some students have used the ethnic slur Jap in their writing, probably because they're not aware of its offensiveness. So let me make this a little bit bigger for the people in the room, and I guess people at home. What the heck? When the United States was fighting World War II, there was a racist distinction in how our enemies were viewed. In fighting the Germans, we looked at it as fighting Nazis. Oh, we're fighting the Nazis. We're not fighting Germans. There's a separation, a distinction between the two. But who is it that attacked Pearl Harbor? Well, that was the Japs. That was who we were fighting. We saw them as some monolithic entity. And it was the entire group of people. How did World War II end? How was it that World War II ended? Do you know? Have you gotten to that point in your history classes yet? Todd?
The Nazis surrendered.
The Nazis surrendered, yes, but then we're still fighting the Japanese. We're still fighting the Japanese army. How does that end? Oh, and you guys can't even see it at home. Duh. Tell me that. Remind me of that stuff. How does World War II end? Zane, are you typing something? So, in terms of its use, you mean? The use of the J word? Does it matter? I don't think it's intentional, because I think the issue is it's coming from a place where the student is not aware of the fact that it is a slur, that it's an ethnic slur. Does that make sense? Okay. He's typing. He had asked, how are they using it? Are they being intentionally rude? You can unmute too, you know. You don't tend to have a problem when you do that, do you? Or did you just freeze? Are you frozen? Okay. In the meantime, how did World War II end? You guys have got to know this. How do you not know this? How do we not know how World War II ended? Anybody else at home know how World War II ended? Thank you. With what, Sam? Sam wrote the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing. What did we use? Yes, atom bombs. The only country in the world to have ever used atomic bombs in war. The only nation. We are the only ones. In fact, we're probably the only country in the world who has used chemical, biological, and atomic weapons. What kind of population were Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Were those military bases? Does anybody know? Just towns. Towns full of civilians. You guys got to go. Drive carefully. Are you driving? Taking the bus? Okay. Not like, some other places. Not to that degree. One of them was almost like a farming town. So Zane, did you have more comment about the J word or no? You can unmute and if you want. Are we beyond that? Are we moving past? Okay. Still writing your thoughts? So in fighting the Germans, we looked at it as fighting Nazis. In fighting Japan, we looked at it as fighting the entirety of Japan. There was no other name. Names matter. I've had a lot of students in the past year of Chinese ethnic background so hurt and offended by former President Trump referring to the pandemic virus as the China flu. And perhaps worse, by fools in social media referring it to as the Kung flu. Think about how offensive that must be. Names and words matter. When we no longer see people as individuals, we're able to treat them badly. Think about the N-word. It's a word that will appear frequently in fences. And when it appears, we will not say it. We're going to look at two pieces right now. And actually, we may only have the opportunity to look at the first one. We'll probably start class next time with the second one. Ijeoma Olowu has written in her memoir about an episode where she and her little brother were referred to as the N-word. When do you suppose that happened? Can anybody put a timeline on that? Anybody want to try to put a timeline on that? Does that still happen today? Yeah. So I want you to think about how this links to Gene's experience. Okay? And again, I'm not going to say the word aloud. We're just going to leave it and let it hang. Okay? If you want to follow along, it is in the agenda. So this is from her memoir, So You Want to Talk About Race. And the chapter, she wrote it in 2018. The chapter is titled, Why Can't I Say the N-Word? The first time I was called, I was 11. My mother had a business trip for a week. and as a single mom, had to find a place to put my brother Aham and I. We were sent to her friend Liz's house in the town of Gold Bar, about 2 hours' drive from our apartment. We were excited for the visit. Gold Bar, a small town nestled in the mountains, was drastically different from our depressing apartment complex surrounded by strip malls. This was a rare chance for us to climb rocks and wade in a river. Liz and her husband's house was a large log cabin with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out on tall trees. Our windows just looked out on other apartments. When we arrived at the house, Aham and I said goodbye to our mom, plopped our bags on the floor, and set out to exploring with Liz's kids, Amy and Nick. Outside of the typical annoyances of being guests in someone's house, the first few days were glorious. We scaled giant rock faces, which I'm sure to my now adult eye would only look about 10 feet tall. We built stick forts. We played hide and seek and pretended that we were the last people on Earth. At night, I'd climb into a sleeping bag on Amy's bedroom floor and we'd giggle about boys. The weekend came to a close, and Monday morning, Liz suggested that we walk Nick and Amy to the school bus. Aham and I were both pretty excited about this. Maybe we'd make more friends and we'd all play together after school. We walked down the gravel road and waited together at the next street. When the bus pulled up, we waved goodbye to Nick and Amy and eagerly looked in the bus windows at the other kids as Nick and Amy made their way to the bus. Some of the windows were down in the warm morning. "Look," one of the kids shouted. "Look!" It took me a second to realize what had just been said. I'd only heard that word said in movies by hateful Southerners and slave owners. But before it could fully register, another kid shouted, "Ha! Look at the..." Within seconds, before Nick and Amy had even climbed on the bus, there was a loud group of kids laughing and shouting at us out the back windows. The words hit like buckets of cold water. I tried not to shake. I looked at Nick and Amy. They would know what to do. These were their friends. But they weren't saying anything. And they weren't looking at us. They were laughing. My brother and I watched silently in horror as the bus drove off, the kids' laughter echoing back at us down the road. We turned around and walked slowly back to the house. I don't think we talked about what had just happened. We didn't have the words to describe our first encounter with such hate. The next morning, as Nick and Amy put their backpacks on, Aham and I stayed put at the table. "Aren't you going to walk them to the bus?" Liz asked, when it became apparent that we weren't moving. My brother shook his head and quietly said, "No, we don't want to." We hadn't discussed this, but Aham knew that I felt the same. Liz looked at her kids briefly and then at us. "Why?" she demanded. Aham looked at her and then at Nick and Amy. "Just don't," he said, and shrugged. Liz was instantly angry. "Oh, you think you're too good for us?" she sneered. My brother and I both shook our heads. There was nothing we could say. We couldn't say in front of Nick and Amy, "The kids all called us, and your children laughed." So we just sat silently, and I tried not to cry. "Your mom sure has spoiled you," she muttered. "Ungrateful little..." She muttered. "Go to school, kids," she snapped, and then left the room. We didn't know what to do. All we knew was that we had obviously done something very wrong. For the rest of the week, we were afraid to leave the house. This town was not safe. What if we ran into those kids? Those kids who hated us, Those kids who shouted the same words that the Klan members on TV had said as they lynched people who looked like us. We didn't want to be out in the woods. We didn't want to go out on the river. We wanted to go home to our dingy apartment complex where nobody called us, where nobody laughed at our blackness. But we couldn't go home. Our fear of the strangers outside had forced us to stay inside with a woman who now vehemently disliked us. For the rest of the week, she watched us like a hawk, yelling about every misplaced dish or any neglected please or thank you. The rest of the week, the words spoiled and lazy were hurled at us as if they were our names. Sensing the change in environment, Nick and Amy started acting more cool toward us, treating us as annoyances rather than friends. They didn't want to play games or talk about friends. They just wanted us to leave. At the end of the week, our mom came to get us. We silently packed our things into the car and waved goodbye at Liz and her family. On the way home, Mom told us about her business trip. It had been a great trip, hard work, but exciting, and her job had never sent her away before. This was as close to a vacation as she was going to get. Aham and I listened to our mom talk about her trip and silently agreed to not tell her about how our week had gone. Our mom didn't get a lot of trips away, and she didn't have very many friends. We didn't want to cause any more trouble. Words have power. Words are more than their dictionary definition. The history of a word matters as long as the effects of that history are still felt. Take, for example, the history of the word. First, simply a take on the Latin noun niger. The word became a slur used to demean black slaves in the U.S. From the 1700s on, the word was used almost exclusively to express hatred. It was a word shouted at black men, women, and children by slave masters as they lashed their backs with whips. It was a word hollered by white men in pickup trucks as they chased down black kids. It was a word repeated by men in white hoods as they got ready to burn a cross on the lawn of a black family. It was a word spat at hanged black bodies. Is a very powerful word with a very painful history. As long as we've had the spoken word, language has been one of the first tools deployed in efforts to oppress others. Words are how we process the world, how we form our societies, how we codify our morals. In order to make injustice and oppression palatable in a world with words that say that such things are unacceptable, we must come up with new words to distance ourselves from the realities of the harm we are perpetrating on others. This is how black people, human beings, become all oppression in race, class, gender, ability, religion. It all began with words. Not all words are equally powerful because not all words have the same history. Take the word cracker. Cracker is a slur sometimes used to refer to white people. Many white people have argued that it is just as bad as using the word. Say both words aloud right now. Loudly, which one turns your stomach? That feeling in your gut when you say the word loudly and clearly, that is the history of the word being invoked with it as well. Cracker simply does not have that. Cracker does not invoke the mass lynchings of white people, blacks-only lunch counters, snarling police dogs aimed at white bodies, because that simply did not happen in our history. Cracker has not been a tool of racial oppression against white people because nobody is or has been racially oppressing white people. Note, if this is where you say, what about the Irish? Note that the word cracker certainly played absolutely no part in the oppression of the Irish, and that oppression was perpetrated by other white people. In our history of racism, words have had a starring role in the brutalization of people of color. Beyond Black America, words have been used in the oppression of many races. I will not use those words here because I am a Black woman, and I do not feel comfortable invoking the painful history of words used to oppress Native American people, Asian American people, Latinx people, and more when my community has not had to suffer the consequences of how those words have been used to justify genocide, internment camps, and more. But looking at American history, words have been used to separate, dehumanize, and oppress, and the power of those words is still felt today. Picture a water fountain with a sign colored on it. Picture a lunch counter declaring whites only. Picture a group of angry white men encircling a terrified Black boy shouting, white power. Think of the words used to subtly signify race. Words like ghetto, nappy, uppity, articulate, thug. All of these words can conjure up powerful emotions because they conjure up the powerful history and present that they have helped create. People of color have inherited the pain of these words. The oppression they face today is a direct result of how these words were used in the past. Today, Black people are still suffering from the ghettoization, poverty, police brutality, and everyday discrimination that these words helped build. In contrast, white people have inherited the privilege that these words made possible. They've inherited the advantage of not having, in this generation and previous, the specific set of disadvantages placed in their way that these words placed on the lives of people of color. This is why, even if some of these words have been reclaimed by some in the community they were used to oppress, when these words are used by white people, that use will continue to be abusive because they're still benefiting from how these words have been used while people of color still suffer. So there's a little bit more left. We've got just a few paragraphs, and I would ask that you reread maybe these last 2 pages on your own, so that you can get it completed. So make sure you read those last 2 pages. Okay. Take care, all. Take care.
Yeah.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, you too.